The air in the Bennett home was filled with the smell of fried chicken and unspoken words. The dining room, with its polished oak table and limp daisies in a vase, seemed like a stage for a play that no one wanted to perform. Leila Bennett idly pushed a piece of asparagus around her plate, her fork lightly scratching the porcelain. Across from her, Ethan sipped his beer, the tattered Longhorns logo on his mug glinting dimly under the chandelier light. Outside, the Austin suburb hummed with the lazy buzz of cicadas, the sound of which seemed to mock the quiet inside. Leela's dark hair was carelessly tied into a bun. Stray strands seemed to be trying to escape from the tension. Her green eyes, usually sharp and lively, were clouded today, staring at the table as if there were answers she couldn't find there. Ethan, broad-shouldered and still retaining the rugged charm of his college football days, leaned back in his chair, his jaw tense. The silence between them was nothing new, but today it felt heavier, like the air before a Texas thunderstorm. "Well," Ethan broke the silence, his voice sounding too loud in the room. "How was your day?" Leela's lips twitched, but it was not a smile. "Like yesterday. Meetings, coffee, more meetings. What about yours?" He shrugged, setting his mug down with a quiet clink. "I fixed the air conditioner in the workshop. The client was all sweaty and thought he would pass out until I started him up." She nodded, but her thoughts were somewhere else, her fingers sliding along the edge of the glass of wine. Ethan looked at her, his brown eyes narrowing slightly. He knew that look Leela was preparing for something. He had seen it before, in those times when she shared dreams or fears, her words poured out like water from a broken dam. But those days seemed distant, buried under the weight of routine and unspoken grievances. "Leela," he said, leaning closer, his voice softening. "What's happening? You are somehow not yourself." Her eyes flickered to him, and for a moment there was a spark in them, anger, perhaps, or challenge. She carefully put down her fork, as if putting down a weapon. "They called me today," she said, her voice smooth but with a sharp undertone. "From the agency in the center. They offered me a job." Ethan's eyebrows rose and a genuine smile appeared on his face. "That advertising work. Leela, this is cool. You've been chasing this for months." "Yes," she answered, but there was no joy in her tone, only some kind of emptiness, from which his smile faded. "Senior copywriter. Good salary, creative control. I start in 2 weeks." He leaned back, studying her. "That's great, honey. Is it true? Then why do you look like you've been given bad news?" Leela's jaw tensed, and she took a sip of wine, her movements slow and deliberate. "I don't know, Ethan. Maybe because I'm not sure what it means for us." The word hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Ethan's smile disappeared, replaced by a wary look. "Us? What does this even mean?" She sighed, pushing her plate away. "Don't pretend. You know it's not like that. We're just going with the flow. Dinner, dishes, bed. And again, I'm tired of this." Ethan's hand clutched the mug, the cracked Longhorns logo blurring under his thumb. "So you think a new job will fix this? Or is it something else?" Leela's eyes flashed, and she leaned forward, her voice quiet but furious. "It's about me, Ethan. In me. I am suffocating in this house, in this life, and you don't even notice. You're there fixing air conditioners, joking with your friends, and I'm here pretending that everything is fine. Are you suffocating?" His voice became louder, pain and anger mixed in it. "Leela, no one is keeping you here. You wanted this house, this life. We built it together." "Together?" She laughed, a bitter sound cutting through the room. "When was the last time we were really together, Ethan? When was the last time you looked at me as a woman and not just your wife?" He looked at her, his face a storm of emotions, confusion, guilt, resistance. "I don't know what you want from me," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I'm here, Leela. Every day. I'm trying." "You're trying," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's the problem. It doesn't have to feel like trying." Her words hit like a fist, and for a moment both were silent. The cicadas outside seemed to grow louder, their humming filling the void where their voices had faded. Ethan ran a hand through his dark hair, his irritation palpable. "And what next?" he asked, his tone becoming harsh. You take this job, so what? Do we just keep pretending everything is normal? Leela's eyes softened, but only for a second before their hardness returned. I don't know, Ethan. I just know I can't go on like this. I need more. More, he repeated, his voice low, dangerous. And what does this more look like, Leela? Because it seems to me that this is no longer me. Leela sat on the back porch, her bare feet touching the warm wooden floor. The city lights twinkled in the distance, the neon signs of the bars on 6th Street beckoning like distant stars. She held a glass of wine, almost empty, her thoughts swirling like moths around a lantern. The conversation with Ethan left an aching emptiness in my chest, but also a strange feeling of freedom. She took a step and told the truth, even if not the whole truth. Working for an agency was just part of it. There was something else she couldn't talk about. Bye. The door slammed in the house, and Leela tensed. Ethan's steps were heavy as he walked out onto the porch, his silhouette standing out like a dark spot against the light from the kitchen. He was holding a new bottle of beer, but did not look at it. I'm going to bed, he said, his voice as cold as the night air. If you need to talk more, I'll be there. Ethan, she began, but he had already turned his back to a wall she couldn't break through. When the door slammed again, Leela closed her eyes, her fingers gripping her glass. She knew this was just the beginning. Something in it is already cracked, like that mug with the Longhorns logo, and the pieces will soon fly apart. A few days later, Leela was sitting in the corner of a neon bar that smelled of bourbon and sweat. The sign outside flashed red and blue, casting colorful reflections on her face. She was wearing a black dress, too elegant for this place, but she didn't care. A man sat opposite her, Ray, her new colleague from the agency. His dark eyes sparkled as he told the story of his latest campaign, but Leela barely listened. Her thoughts were somewhere between home and this bar, between Ethan and the man who looked at her as if she were the only one in the room. Are you okay? Ray asked, his voice low and slightly hoarse. You look like you're not somewhere. Leela smiled, but the smile was forced. Just. A lot of things. New job, everything. He leaned closer, his hand lightly touching hers on the counter. If you want, tell me. I know how to listen. She looked at his hand, then at his face. There was something dangerous but attractive about him, like a storm on the horizon. And at that moment, Leela felt something move inside her, as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff and was ready to jump. Maybe another time, she said, but her voice was softer than she intended. Ray smiled, and there was a promise in that smile. Leela knew it was a mistake. But that night, under the neon lights, the mistake seemed to be the only thing that made sense. Ethan didn't sleep at home. He was sitting in the living room, the TV was turned off, and in his hands was the same mug with the cracked logo. He looked at her as if she could explain what had gone wrong. Leela returned late, her steps were quiet, but he heard. He always heard. She walked past the living room without looking and went upstairs. The bedroom door closed with a soft click. Morning Austin was saturated with heat. Even at 9 in the morning, the asphalt on the streets was shaking from the haze. Leela Bennett stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, straightening the black jacket that emphasized her slender figure. Her green eyes carefully studied the reflection, as if looking for cracks in the mask of confidence that she had put on. Today was her first day at the Blaze Media advertising agency, and she felt everything inside her shrinking, a mixture of excitement and anxiety, like before jumping into cold water. Ethan had already gone to his workshop, leaving a note on the kitchen table. Good luck today. I'm proud of you. Leela read it, crumpled the paper, and threw it in the trash. Ethan's pride was the last thing she needed right now. She wanted to feel alive, and not someone's wife, someone's shadow. Grabbing her bag and keys, she left the house without looking back. The agency was located in downtown Austin, in a glass building that shone in the sun like a shard of the future. Everything inside was full of energy, open spaces, bright posters on the walls, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the hum of voices. Leela walked through the glass doors, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and she felt the staff's eyes skim over her. Some smiled, others simply assessed new girl, threat, or ally. She was met at the reception by her assistant, a young girl with a piercing in her nose and a tablet in her hands. "Leela Bennett?" she asked, smiling. "Damien is waiting for you in the conference room. Let's go." Leela nodded, her fingers lightly squeezing the strap of her bag. Damien Reed, her new boss. She had heard of him. He was a legend in Austin advertising circles. Charismatic, ambitious, with a reputation as a man who could sell sand in the desert. Leela saw his photo on the agency's website. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, a look that seemed to see right through you. She brushed aside these thoughts, but somewhere in the depths of her mind they left a mark. The conference room was spacious, with panoramic windows overlooking the city. The team, about a dozen people, has already gathered at a long table, laptops open, coffee in cardboard cups. Leela took a seat at the back, trying to look casual, although her heart was beating faster than she would have liked. The door opened and Damien Reed entered the room. He was taller than Leela expected, wearing a dark blue suit that fit him as if it had been sewn directly onto his body. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his smile was both warm and predatory. The room seemed to come to life with his appearance. The employees straightened up. The conversations died down. "Good morning, team," he said. His voice was deep, with a slight hoarseness that forced you to listen. "Today is a special day for us. We welcome a new member to our family, Leela Bennett, our new senior copywriter." He turned to her, and their eyes met. His eyes gray-blue, like the sky before a storm, lingered on her a little longer than necessary. Leela felt a warmth rise to her cheeks, but she forced herself to smile and nod. "Leela, would you like to say a few words?" Damien suggested, leaning on the table and looking at her with interest. She stood up. Her movements were confident, although everything inside was trembling. "Thank you, Damien. I'm glad to be here. Advertising for me is not just words. It is a way to tell a story that catches you. I hope we can create something cool together." Her voice sounded firmer than she expected, and the team nodded in approval. Damien smiled wider, and there was something about that smile that made her pulse quicken. "Well said," he said, without looking away. "Welcome to Blaze." The day passed in a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and new faces. Leela quickly fell into the rhythm of the agency, and her ideas for a campaign for a local bourbon brand caused a lively debate in the creative room. She felt in her place, as if for the first time in a long time she was breathing deeply. But every time Damien was nearby discussing the layout, commenting on her text, or simply passing by, she noticed his gaze. He was unobtrusive but tenacious, as if he saw more than she wanted to show. By 5 o'clock, the office began to empty. Employees were leaving behind the smell of coffee and the rustling of papers. Leela was sitting at her desk, looking over her notes, when Damien appeared in the doorway of her office. He tapped on the doorframe. His shirt was undone at the top button, his tie gone. "Leela, do you have a minute?" he asked, his tone casual, but there was a sparkle in his eyes. She put the laptop down, trying not to show how her heart skipped a beat. "Certainly. Is there something wrong with the project?" "I want to discuss the bourbon campaign. You have a couple of ideas there that can be improved. Do you mind staying longer?" She knew she had to say no. Ethan was waiting for her at home, dinner, their tense conversations. But something in Damien's voice, in his gaze, pulled her like a magnet. "Okay," she said. Her voice was even, but everything was boiling inside. "Let's discuss." They moved into his office, spacious and overlooking the neon lights of Austin. On the table was a bottle of bourbon, the same one for which they were preparing the campaign, and 2 glasses. Damien poured some into each, handing one to Leela. "For inspiration," he said with a slight smile. "Don't be afraid, this is not a mandatory item." She took the glass, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm not afraid," she answered, meeting his gaze. They started talking about the project, about slogans, visual images, target audience. But the conversation quickly slipped into personal matters. Damien talked about his move to Austin and how he built the agency from the ground up. Leela, warmed by bourbon and his attention, shared the story of how she dreamed of becoming a writer, but life pulled her into a routine. "You don't look like the type to give up," he said, leaning back in his chair. His gaze was warm, but there was a depth in it that frightened and beckoned at the same time. "Why are you here, Leela? What are you looking for?" She froze, her fingers clenching the glass. The question was too direct, too close to the truth. She could lie, say something about her career, but the words came out on their own. "I want to feel alive," she said quietly. "I'm tired of pretending that what I have is enough for me." Damien looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath hitch. He leaned closer, his voice becoming quieter. "Then don't pretend," he said. "Not with me." The room seemed to shrink, the air became thick. Leela felt her heart pounding, the warmth of the bourbon mixing with the heat of his words. She knew that it was dangerous, that she was playing with fire. But at this moment she didn't care. "Damien," she began, but her voice wavered. He raised his hand to stop her. "Don't say anything. Just think about what you want. Not what you should, but what you want." She nodded, unable to look away. The moment stretched out like a string ready to snap. Finally, she stood up. Her movements were sharp, as if she was trying to throw off an obsession. "I need to go," she said, grabbing her bag. "Thank you for the conversation." He smiled, but there was a promise in that smile. "See you tomorrow, Leela." When she left the building, night had already fallen on Austin. Neon bar signs flashed and music poured out of open doors. Leela stopped on the sidewalk, her breathing uneven. She felt as if she had just escaped from a trap, or, conversely, had fallen into one. At home, Ethan was in the living room. The TV was flickering, but he wasn't looking at the screen. That same mug with the Longhorns logo sat on the coffee table empty. He looked up as Leela entered, and there was a mixture of weariness and suspicion in his gaze. "For a long time," he said. His voice was even, but there was a heaviness in it. "First day," she answered, avoiding his gaze. "A lot of work." He nodded but didn't say anything. Leela walked into the bedroom, her hands shaking as she took off her jacket. In the mirror, she saw her reflection-flushed cheeks, eyes full of guilt and something else. Something that scared her more than she was willing to admit. She went to bed, but sleep did not come. Thoughts about Damien, about his words, about his look were spinning in my head like a record with a stuck track. And somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, another voice sounded, Ethan's voice, his pain, his question. "And what does this more look like, Leela?" She closed her eyes, but the darkness did not bring peace. Something inside her was already cracked, and she knew that the crack would only grow. A month had passed since Leela had started working at Blaze Media, and Austin seemed to have changed along with her. Hot days gave way to stuffy nights, and the neon lights of 6th Street beckoned more and more, as if winking at her new desires. She felt at home at the agency. Her campaign ideas were discussed at every meeting. Her colleagues joked that she was the new star, and Damien Reed looked at her with approval that was something more than just professional. She and Damien grew closer slowly, but inevitably. It started with little things. The morning coffee he brought her with a slight smile, jokes in the creative room, when his laughter sounded a little louder if she was nearby. Sometimes his hand would touch her accidentally when he was passing a folder or when they were leaning over a layout together, and these touches would leave a warmth on her skin that would not go away for hours. Leela found herself waiting for these moments, looking for him in the office, and every time their eyes met, her heart gave an extra beat. At home, everything was different. Ethan became more silent, his questions about her day sounding like accusations. She came back later, making excuses about deadlines, but the truth was that she didn't want to be home. The living room with the tattered Longhorns mug, the strained conversations, the suffocating silence, it all felt like a cage to her. Ethan noticed her detachment, but did not speak directly. His look, heavy and tired, was more eloquent than words. One evening, when Leela returned after 10, he was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. She threw her bag on the chair, avoiding his eyes. "I'm late again," he said without looking up. His voice was smooth, but there was bitterness in it. "Project," she answered, opening the refrigerator to hide her face. "Campaign for bourbon." Delivery is coming soon. He grunted, and the sound cut her like a knife. Do you even remember the last time we talked normally? Leela froze, her hand clutching the bottle of water. She could have turned around, said something, tried to explain herself, but instead she simply closed the refrigerator door. I'm tired, Ethan. Let's not today. He didn't answer, and she went upstairs, feeling his gaze burning her back. In the bedroom, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. Disheveled hair, dark circles under her eyes, but there was something new in her gaze, a spark that was not there before. And this spark frightened her as much as it attracted her. On Friday, the office was buzzing with anticipation for the weekend. Colleagues discussed plans, someone suggested going to a bar, someone joked about a pool party. Leela was sitting at her desk, finishing up some copy for a new campaign, when Damien appeared at the door. He was without a jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing his strong forearms. His smile was light, but there was something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. Nice job with the bourbon, he said, leaning on the joint. The client is delighted with your slogan. A taste that burns the soul is strong. She smiled, leaning back in her chair. Thank you. Although you did add a couple of touches to it, so that's our credit. He grinned, stepping closer. Teamwork, right? Look, since we work so well together, how about we celebrate? Let's have a drink after work. I know a place nearby. Leela froze. It was not just coffee in the office, not an accidental touch. This was a step over the edge, and she knew it. Her phone was on the table, the screen was dark, but she felt that Ethan could call at any second. She had to say no, go home, try to fix what was falling apart at the seams. But instead, she looked at Damien, at his dark eyes, at his smile that promised her life, not routine. Okay, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Let's... His smile grew wider, and there was something triumphant about it. Great. Meet me at the gate at 7. The bar they went to was one of those places on 6th Street where the neon mixed with the smell of whiskey and live music. The Lone Star sign flashed red, casting a glare onto the sidewalk. It was noisy but cozy inside. Wooden tables, dim lights, a guitarist in the corner playing something blues. Leela and Damien took a table by the window, their knees almost touching under the table. He ordered bourbon, she ordered wine, and they started talking. First about work, then about music, about how Austin is changing. Damien was easy, his stories flowed like a river, and Leela found herself laughing more often than she had in months. He looked at her as if she were the only one in this crowded bar, and the feeling was intoxicating, more dangerous than any bourbon. You're different, Leela, he said when their glasses were empty. His voice became quieter, more intimate. You have fire. Why are you hiding it? She looked away, her fingers nervously twisting the stem of her glass. Don't know. Sometimes fire burns everything around. He leaned closer, his hand lay on the table, almost touching hers. And sometimes it just warms you up. Depends on who is nearby. Her phone vibrated, and the screen lit up Ethan. Leela looked at the name, and her stomach lurched. She could answer, say that she was late, that she would be home soon. But instead, she clicked decline and put the phone in her bag. Damien noticed, but didn't say anything, just smiled, and that smile was like permission. They ordered more drinks, and the conversation became bolder. He talked about his life before Austin, the divorce that left him with an empty apartment and new ambitions. She shared bits of hers, the dreams that had been gathering dust on the shelf, how marriage had become like old clothes that no longer fit. They talked until the bar began to empty, until the guitarist left, leaving only a hum of voices. When they went outside, the night was warm, with a taste of asphalt and freedom. Damien stopped at her car, his gaze hard but soft. Thank you for the evening, he said, his voice low. You're special, Leela. She wanted to answer, but the words were stuck. He stepped closer, and for a second she thought he would kiss her. But he just touched her shoulder with a light, almost weightless movement, and left, leaving her standing under the flashing sign. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the living room. Ethan was sleeping or pretending to be when Leela crept into the bedroom. She kicked off her shoes, feeling the scent of bourbon and neon cling to her skin. In the darkness, she lay down on her side of the bed, trying not to touch Ethan. His breathing was even, but she knew he was awake. She knew he sensed lies even if he didn't say it. Her phone was on the nightstand, the screen still dark. But Damien's words, his look, his touch were spinning in her head. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. The sparks she'd felt all evening still burned, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to put them out. The Blaze media office was empty, only the hum of the air conditioners breaking the silence. Outside the windows, Austin glowed with neon lights, and inside the conference room there was still an air of triumph. The presentation of the bourbon campaign went perfectly. The client was delighted, the team applauded, and Leila Bennett felt on top. Her slogan, "The taste that burns the soul," became the star of the evening, and her colleagues vied with each other in praising her until they went home. Everyone except her and Damien Reed. They stayed in his office to work out the details. That's what they told the others, but they both knew it was just an excuse. The table was littered with papers and empty coffee cups, and on the edge sat a bottle of bourbon, a gift from a client. Damien poured 2 glasses, his movements were confident, but there was a sparkle in his eyes that made Leila nervous. "To you," he said, raising his glass. His voice was low, with that hoarseness that she had already learned to recognize. "You were great today, Leila. I'm serious." She smiled as she accepted the glass. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she hid it by taking a sip. The bourbon burned my throat, but the warmth it brought was pleasant, almost comforting. "Thank you," she replied, looking away to the window where the lights of the city twinkled like distant stars. "But it was a team effort. You said it yourself." He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, revealing his strong forearms, and his tie had long been lying somewhere on the table. "Don't put yourself down. I saw how you held the hall. You have a talent not only to write, but also to light people up. This is rare." Leila felt her cheeks getting warmer, and it wasn't just from the bourbon. She placed the glass on the table, trying not to look at it for too long. "Are you always so generous with compliments, or is it the bourbon talking?" Damien laughed, his laugh deep and infectious. He leaned closer, his elbows resting on the table, closing the distance between them. "Bourbon only loosens the tongue, Leila. But I say what I think. You're not like everyone else." Her heart skipped a beat. She knew she should change the subject, leave, but his gaze gray-blue, like a stormy sky, kept her in place. "And what am I?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended, almost a whisper. He didn't answer immediately, instead finishing his bourbon and setting the glass down with a slight clunk. Then he stood up, walked around the table, and stopped next to her. Leila felt his closeness, the warmth of his body, the smell of his cologne, something sharp, with notes of wood and spice. She looked up, and their gazes collided like sparks ready to ignite a fire. "You are fire," he said finally, his voice low, almost hoarse. "And I can't stop thinking about how you're burning." Her breathing hitched. She should have pulled away, said that it was a mistake, that she was married, that she had Ethan. But Damien's words, his proximity, his gaze, all of it was like a magnet, pulling her over the edge. She gripped the edge of the table, her fingers turning white. "Don't say anything," he said, his voice soft, but there was steel in it. "Just tell me you feel it too." Leila opened her mouth to protest, but the truth was what she felt. "I felt his every glance, every random touch, every moment when he was nearby." She felt more alive than she had in years, and this feeling was stronger than her fears, stronger than her guilt. "I—" She paused, her eyes searching for him. "I feel—" That was enough. Damien stepped closer, his hand touching her cheek, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, and Leila trembled under the touch. She knew this was the point of no return, but her body had already decided for her. She leaned towards him, and their lips met slowly at first, almost timidly, but then hungrily, as if they had both been waiting too long. The kiss was hot, soaked in bourbon and desperation. Leila felt his hands slide around her waist, pulling her closer, and she didn't resist. Her fingers tangled in his hair, her body pressed against his, and everything around him, the office, the papers, the city outside the window, disappeared. There were only them, their breath, their warmth. "Leela," he whispered, breaking away for a second, his lips still touching hers. "Are you sure?" She wasn't sure. But she wanted it, she wanted him, she wanted to forget everything that kept her in a cage. "Yes," she breathed, and that was enough. Damien picked her up, his arms strong, sure. He sat her down on the table, sweeping away papers and glasses, which fell to the floor with a thud. Leela didn't think about what would happen tomorrow, about what she left at home, about Ethan's call that she ignored an hour ago. She thought only about him, about his hands that unbuttoned her blouse, about his lips that left a mark on her neck, about his breath that mixed with hers. Their passion was fast, almost violent, like a storm that sweeps away everything in its path. The table creaked under their weight, the bourbon spilled, permeating the air with a pungent odor. Leela clung to his shoulders, her nails leaving marks, and he whispered her name like a spell. It wasn't just sex, it was release, a breaking of the chains she had worn for too long. When it was all over, they froze, their breathing was heavy and uneven. Leela was sitting on the edge of the table, her blouse hanging over one shoulder, her hair disheveled. Damien stood in front of her, his shirt unbuttoned, his eyes still burning. He touched her face, his thumb tracing her lips. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was hoarse, but there was tenderness in it. She nodded, although she wasn't sure. Her body was still trembling, but something else was growing in her chest, a mixture of euphoria and horror. She had just crossed the line, and there was no turning back. "Yes," she lied, straightening her blouse. "I'm fine." He smiled, but there was something in that smile that made her wary. It was as if he knew that she belonged to him now, even if she didn't realize it herself yet. "This is just the beginning, Leela," he said, leaning down to kiss her again. "You know." She didn't answer, but his words echoed in her head. She knew. She knew that this was not a one-time impulse, that she was already involved in something more than she could control. Leela left the office an hour later. Her steps were unsteady, as if the ground under her feet had become unsteady. The streets of Austin were still the same, noisy, bright, full of life, but she felt like a stranger in this city, in her own skin. Her phone was flashing with notifications. 3 missed messages from Ethan, a message, "Where are you? It's already midnight." She didn't answer, just put the phone in her bag and went home. When she entered the house, the lights in the living room were off, but Ethan was sitting on the sofa, his silhouette a dark spot standing out in the semi-darkness. That same mug with the Longhorns logo sat in front of him, empty as a symbol of their marriage. "Where have you been?" he asked. His voice was cold, but there was pain in it. Leela froze, her hand clenching the strap of her bag. She could lie, say about work, but the lie was already in her breath, in her smell, in her eyes. "In the office," she said. Her voice was even, but she knew he wouldn't believe it. Celebrated the success of the campaign. He looked at her, and there was such weariness in his gaze that her heart sank. "You smell like bourbon, Leela." And not only them. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words stuck. Ethan stood up. His movements were sharp, as if he was holding himself back with all his strength. "I'm not a fool," he said, his voice trembling. "I know something is happening. Just tell me the truth." Leela looked at him, at the man she once loved, and felt her world crumble. But instead of the truth, she chose silence. She walked past him, her heels clicking on the wooden floor, and went up to the bedroom, closing the door. Ethan remained in the living room, his fingers clenching the mug until it cracked even more. He didn't know what exactly happened, but he felt like his life had just changed forever. Austin was glowing in the sunset, its streets filled with heat and the smell of barbecue wafting from the outdoor cafes. With its eclectic storefronts, graffiti, and neon signs, South Congress was the heart of the city, bustling with life even on a weeknight. Leela Bennett stood at the window of the loft Damian Reed had rented for her 2 weeks ago. The space was stylish, with exposed brick, huge windows, and a bed covered in black silk. This place was their sanctuary, their secret where they could be themselves, away from the eyes of the world. Leela held a glass of wine, her fingers nervously twisting the stem. She was wearing the light dress Damien had given her last week, black, tight, and low cut. It wasn't her style, but he said it screened her, and she put it on to see his eyes light up. Now, looking at the city, she felt like a different woman, not the Leela who was preparing dinner in the suburbs, but someone brave, alive, and dangerous. The loft door creaked open and Damien entered. He was wearing a dark shirt, no tie, with a tired but satisfied smile. In his hands he held a bottle of bourbon and two glasses. Leela turned, her heart doing its usual leap at the sight of him. "Long day?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but there was a slight mockery in it. He grinned, placing the bottle on the table. "Clients who think they know our work better than we do. Nothing new." He walked up to her, his hand slid around her waist, pulling her closer. "And you? You look like you've been waiting for me all day." Leela smiled, but her gaze was more serious than she wanted. Maybe she was waiting, or just trying to understand what we were doing. His eyebrows raised, but he didn't let her go. Instead, he leaned down, his lips touching her neck, leaving a light mark. "We do what we want, Leela. What we feel. Is this not enough?" She closed her eyes, letting his warmth wash over her, but the question still burned. "Sometimes I feel like it's too much," she whispered, "and at the same time, not enough." Damien pulled back, his gaze becoming more attentive. He took her hand and led her to the sofa, where they sat down, their knees touching. He poured the bourbon and handed her the glass, but didn't drink it himself, instead looking at her with an intensity that always confused her. "Speak," he said. "What's bothering you?" Leela took a sip. The bourbon burned her throat, but gave her courage. "This loft, us, all this." She gestured around the space with her hand. "It's like a dream, Damien. But I don't know where it leads. I lied to Ethan, saying I go on business trips, but every time I come home, I feel like I'm breaking something, and myself included." His face became more serious, but he did not interrupt. She continued, her voice shaking, but she couldn't stop. "I don't want to be the one who lives a lie, but I can't leave you. You, you make me feel alive, and I'm afraid that's all I have." Damien set his glass down, his hand resting on hers, warm and sure. "You're not alone in this, Leela. I feel it too. Every time you're around, I think that this is what makes life worth living. And I don't want it to be just loft, just moments." She looked at him, her eyes searching for the truth in his words. "Then what is it, Damien? What are we building? Because I can't continue if this is just a game." He fell silent, and for a second it seemed to her that he would look away, avoiding answering. But instead he leaned closer, his voice becoming quieter but firmer. "This is not a game," he said. "I'm serious, Leela. I want to be with you. Not only here, not only at night. I want a future." Her heart sank. She knew about his wife, Claire, although he rarely spoke about her. Their marriage was more of a formality, as he once mentioned a union for business habit, but not love. But hearing this, hearing the promise, was like a step into the abyss. "And Claire?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What's wrong with her?" Damien sighed, his fingers squeezing her hand. "I'll leave her. I've already spoken to the lawyer. It won't be fast, but I'll do it. For us." Leela looked at him, her breathing hitched. She wanted to believe, she desperately wanted to. His words were like a life preserver in the stormy sea of her guilt and fears. "Do you promise?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded, his gaze firm, almost furious. "I promise. I want you, Leela, not just as a lover. I want everything you, our life, our future." She felt tears sting her eyes, but held them back. Instead, she leaned in and kissed him, her lips salty with bourbon and emotion. The kiss was deep, almost desperate, as if she was trying to convince herself that his words were true. Damien responded with the same passion, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and the loft became their world again, without Ethan, Claire, or lies. Days turned into weeks, and Leela sank deeper and deeper into her new world. She spent almost every night in the loft, telling Ethan she was going to Dallas or Houston for work meetings. Lies became second nature to her. They rolled off her tongue so easily that sometimes they frightened her. Ethan seemed to accept her explanation, but his gaze became harder and harder, his questions less and less frequent. He began to drink more, the old Longhorn's mug now always nearby, filled with beer or something stronger. One evening, when Leela returned home from another business trip, Ethan was waiting for her in the living room. The lights were dimmed, the TV was turned off, and the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Did you have a good trip?" he asked, his voice as cold as the autumn wind. Leela froze, her bag still hanging over her shoulder. "Yes," she answered, trying to sound natural. "Tiring, but productive." He nodded, but his eyes never left hers. "Strange," he said, rubbing his chin. "I called your office today. The secretary said you've been in Austin all week." Her stomach clenched, but she forced herself to smile. She must have got it mixed up. "I was working with a client outside the office." Ethan looked at her, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. Not love, not anger, but fatigue mixed with suspicion. "Leela," he said quietly, "I don't know what's going on, but I'm not blind. If you want to leave, just say so." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words stuck. Instead, she shook her head and walked upstairs, her steps fast, almost panicked. In the bedroom, she closed the door and leaned against it, her breathing uneven. She knew he was right. She knew that lies couldn't last forever. But the thought of leaving everything Damien, the loft, their promises was unbearable. Everything was different in the loft. There was no guilt, only passion and dreams. Damien was attentive. His words about the future sounded more and more often. He talked about a house outside the city, about travel, about how they would build an agency together. Leela clung to these words like a life preserver. She imagined their life without Ethan, without Claire, without a past. And every time she doubted, Damien found a way to remind her why she chose him. One night, after love, they lay on silk sheets, their bodies still warm. Leela looked at the ceiling, her head resting on his chest. "What do you think our life will be like?" she asked, her voice sleepy but curious. Damien ran his fingers through her hair, his breathing even. "Free," he said. "We will do what we want. No cages, no obligations, just us." She smiled, but fear stirred in her chest. "What if it doesn't work? What if we can't?" He turned to her, his eyes dark but warm. "It will work, Leela. I won't let you go. You are mine." These words were like an oath, and she believed. She wanted to believe. But somewhere in the back of her mind, Ethan's voice sounded, his tired question, "If you want to leave, just say so." And that voice was the only thing that stopped her from completely losing herself in Damien's promises. The evening in suburban Austin was quiet, except for the cicadas singing their endless song and a gentle wind rustling the curtains in the Bennett house. Inside, however, the silence was different, heavy, like before a thunderstorm. Ethan Bennett stood at the stove, stirring pasta sauce. Two candles were burning on the table, their flames flickering, casting soft shadows on a bottle of red wine and two glasses. He put on a clean shirt for the first time in weeks, and even tried to comb his hair, which usually stuck out in all directions. Today he wanted to return something a piece of that life, when Leela looked at him with warmth and not with emptiness. Leela entered the house around 7, her heels clicking on the wooden floor, her bag hanging from her shoulder. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, her green eyes flickering over the table, the candles, Ethan. For a second her face softened, but then her usual mask returned cold, distant. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was even, but there was a sense of wariness in it. Ethan turned, wiping his hands on a towel. He smiled, although the smile came out forced. "Dinner. Thought we should, well, spend time together, just like before." Leela placed her bag on the chair. Her movements were slow, as if she was stalling for time. "You didn't warn me," she said, avoiding his gaze. "I've had a long day, Ethan. I'm tired." His smile wavered, but he didn't give up. "I know you work hard. That's why I thought we needed this. Just you and me, without anything else. Sit down, I'm almost finished. She sighed, but still sat down at the table, her fingers nervously fiddling with the edge of the tablecloth. Ethan placed a plate of pasta in front of her and poured some wine, trying not to notice how her gaze wandered somewhere past. He sat down opposite and raised his glass. For us, he said, his voice was soft, but there was hope in it. Leela raised her glass, but didn't clink it. She just took a sip. The wine was tart, too heavy for this evening. She put the glass down, her eyes finally met him, and there was something in them that made his heart clench, not anger, not love, but emptiness. Ethan, she began, her voice quiet but firm. Why all this? He froze, his hand holding the glass stopped halfway. What do you mean? Why? I'm trying, Leela, trying to get us back. She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. There is no us, Ethan. Not now, and you know it. The words hit like a fist. Ethan set his glass down, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. What do you want to say? That it's over? Just like that, without conversation, without a chance. Leela looked away, her fingers fiddling with the tablecloth more. I don't know what I want. But this. She gestured around the table, the candles him. It doesn't work. I don't feel the way I should. His face darkened, pain mixed with anger flashed in his eyes. How do you feel, Leela? Because all I see is you leaving. Every evening, every damn day. You are out there somewhere, but not with me. She stood up, her movements were sharp, as if she could no longer sit still. Don't do this, Ethan. Don't make me feel guilty. I didn't ask for this dinner. I didn't ask you to pretend everything was fine. Pretend? His voice became louder. He also stood up, his hands clenched into fists. You're pretending, Leela. You come home stinking of bourbon and his cologne, and you think I won't notice? Do you think I'm blind? Her face turned pale, but she did not back down. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice trembling, but there was steel in it. You just want me to be that Leela who cooked soup for you and waited for you at home. But that Leela is no more. Ethan stepped towards her, his eyes blazing. Then who are you now? Who is this woman lying to my face? The one that goes on business trips and returns with someone else's scent. Leela opened her mouth to answer, but the words stuck. She felt the truth burning in her throat, but she couldn't let it out. Instead, she grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Where are you going? Ethan shouted, his voice breaking. Leela, come back and talk to me. But she didn't turn around. The door slammed, and the silence that remained was louder than any words. Ethan stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the candles that were still burning, their flames trembling like his own heart. He grabbed the Longhorn's mug that was on the table and threw it at the wall. She fell into pieces like their marriage. Leela sat in the car, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She didn't know where she was going, but her feet led her to South Congress, to the loft where Damien was waiting. The streets of Austin were bright and full of life, but inside there was a storm raging. The fight with Ethan left a wound, but not guilt rather, the feeling that she was losing the last thread connecting her to her past. And this thought, instead of frightening, brought strange relief. She walked up to the loft, her steps echoing in the empty hallway. Damien was there, sitting on the couch with his laptop, but when he saw her, he immediately put it down. His dark eyes scanned her face, noticing her disheveled hair and reddened eyes. What's happened? He asked, standing up. His voice was soft, but there was anxiety in it. Leela dropped her bag on the floor, her breathing uneven. We quarreled. With Ethan. He knows, Damien. Not everything, but enough. Damien walked up to her, his hands resting on her shoulders, warm and confident. Hey, breathe. Tell me. She shook her head, her fingers gripping his shirt. He arranged the dinner, the candles, everything. I tried to bring back something that no longer exists. And I couldn't. I just left. Damien looked at her. His gaze was attentive, but a shadow of something flashed in its satisfaction, perhaps. You did the right thing, Leela. You can't live for him. You deserve better. She looked up, her voice trembling. What if I'm wrong? What if I ruin everything and it's not worth it? He took her face in his hands, his thumbs touching her cheeks. You're not mistaken. We are the present, Leela. I promised you a future, and I keep my word. Do you believe me? She nodded, her eyes shining with the tears she was holding back. I believe. But I'm scared, Damien. I don't know how to do this. How to leave. He smiled. His smile was warm, but there was something predatory in it. You're already doing this. Every day you spend with me, you choose yourself. And I'm here to help you. We will get through this together. Leela pressed herself against him, her face buried in his chest. His words were like a bomb, but somewhere in the depths of her mind doubt stirred. She waved him off, letting his warmth, his promises, lull her to sleep. She wanted to believe that he was her future, that the loft, their nights, their passion was not just an escape, but the beginning of something more. They didn't sleep that night. The loft was their world, without Ethan, guilt, or the past. Damien was attentive, his hands, his lips, his words reminding her why she chose him. They talked about the future, about a house outside the city, about travel, about how they would be free. Leela clung to those dreams, imagining a life without lies, without a cracked Longhorn's mug, without Ethan's gaze tearing her heart apart. But in the morning, when she returned home, reality struck again. Ethan was in the kitchen, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept. The fragments of the mug were still lying against the wall. No one had removed them. He looked at her, and there was no anger in his gaze, only pain, so deep that Leela felt her resolve crack. I don't know how much longer I can take this, he said, his voice hoarse. If you left, Leela, just say so. Don't make me live in this hell. She wanted to answer, to say that she was leaving, that she had chosen a different life. But the words stuck, and instead she simply nodded and went upstairs. In the bedroom, she sat on the bed, her hands shaking. She thought about Damien, about his promises, about the loft that had become her refuge. And at that moment, she decided not today, not now, but soon. She will leave Ethan. She would choose Damien. She would choose herself. But even with that thought, there was an emptiness in her chest that she couldn't explain. And somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, a voice sounded, quiet but insistent, "What if you're wrong?" The Bennett home, usually shrouded in suburban quiet, was as tense that evening as before an explosion. Leela stood in the living room, her fingers nervously squeezing the strap of her bag and her green eyes avoiding looking at Ethan. He sat on the sofa, his broad shoulders hunched and his hands clenched into fists on his knees. There was a new mug on the coffee table, no Longhorn's logo, just gray, featureless like their marriage. Pieces of the old one were still in the trash, a reminder of how broken everything had become. Leela knew that this conversation was inevitable. Weeks of lies, evasive answers, and nights in the South Congress loft had taken their toll. Ethan was not blind, and his patience seemed to be running out. She felt it in his silence, in his gaze, which was now not just tired, but broken. Today she decided to tell the truth, not all, but enough to end their suffering. Damien was waiting for her in the loft, his promises of the future ringing in her ears, and she clung to them like a lifeline. "Ethan," she began, her voice quiet but firm, "we need to talk." He looked up, his face stony, but there was pain in his brown eyes. "Now do you want to talk?" His voice was hoarse, sarcastic. "After all these business trips, after you stopped even pretending to care?" Leela swallowed, her fingers tightening on the strap. "I don't want to lie anymore," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You deserve the truth." Ethan straightened up, his fists unclenching, but his fingers trembling. "Is it true?" He chuckled, but the laugh was bitter, like cheap beer. "Okay, Leela, give me your truth. Where were you yesterday, and the day before yesterday, and all those nights when I waited for you like an idiot?" Her heart was pounding, but she didn't back down. "I was with someone," she said, her voice wavering, but she continued. "With another man. This just started recently, but I can't pretend that everything is fine anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Ethan's face turned pale, his eyes widened and then narrowed, as if he was trying to protect himself from a blow. With someone else, he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Are you? Are you sleeping with someone else? Leela nodded, her throat tightening. Yes, and I can't stop it. I tried Ethan, but I'm not happy. Not with you. Not here. He stood up so abruptly that the sofa creaked. His hands were shaking, and he ran them through his hair as if he was trying to control himself. Not happy? His voice broke and became louder. You're not happy, and instead of telling me you're having sex with some bastard behind my back? How much, Leela? How long have you been lying to me? She took a step back, her back hitting the wall. A couple of months, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I didn't want it to happen like this, but I couldn't. I couldn't continue to live the way I was before. Ethan laughed, but there was nothing funny in this laugh, only pain, rage, despair. A couple of months, he repeated, his eyes sparkling, not with tears, but with anger. So what, you just decided that I'm not worthy of knowing. Why should I sit here and cook you damn dinner while you have fun? This is not about entertainment, she objected, her voice becoming firmer. It's about me, Ethan. About the fact that I was suffocating here. You didn't see it, but I was drowning. And he gave me air. Ethan stepped closer, his face contorted with rage. Who is this? He, Leela? Your boss? Some guy from your agency? Give me a name so I know who to hate. Leela shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that I cannot be the wife you want. I don't want this. He froze, his breathing was heavy and uneven. Then he turned, his gaze falling on a vase of wilted daisies standing on the shelf. The vase was old, a gift from his mother for their wedding. He grabbed her and threw her forcefully into the wall. It shattered into pieces like their lives, and the sound echoed in the room. Damn it, Leela, he shouted, his voice trembling. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to wake up every day knowing that you don't love me? But I tried, I held on to us, and you just took it and destroyed everything. Leela flinched, but did not retreat. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but she did not look away. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice hoarse. But I can't pretend. I want to leave Ethan. I want a divorce. The word divorce struck like lightning. Ethan froze, his chest heaving, and his eyes, filled with rage, now glittered with something else pain that he could no longer hide. He sank onto the sofa, his hands falling to his knees, as if all the air had left him. Divorce, he repeated, his voice quiet, broken. What do you want? Just throw away everything we had. Leela swallowed, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag until her knuckles turned white. This is not about throwing it away. It's about being honest. We're both miserable, Ethan. You can see it. He looked at her, and there was such emptiness in his gaze that her heart sank. I loved you, Leela, with all my soul. And you just trampled on it. She wanted to answer, to say that she had loved him too, once, but the words stuck. Instead, she stepped towards the door, her movements slow, as if she was carrying the whole world on her shoulders. I'll talk to the lawyer, she said without turning around. We will do this peacefully if you want. Ethan didn't answer. He looked at the fragments of the vase, his face motionless, like a mask. Leela opened the door, and the night air rushed into the house, cold and sharp. She walked out without looking back, her heels clicking on the path until she got into the car. South Congress greeted her with neon and noise. The loft was warm, smelling of bourbon and his cologne. Damien was waiting for her, sitting on the sofa with a glass in his hand. Seeing her tear-stained face, he stood up, his dark eyes filled with worry. Leela, what happened? He asked, coming closer. Are you okay? She dropped her bag on the floor, her hands shaking. I told him, she breathed, her voice hoarse. She said about us, about divorce. Damien froze, his face was serious, but there was a spark in his eyes, not alarm, but something similar to relief. How is he? Leela shook her head, her fingers clutching his shirt. He's furious. He broke a vase and screamed. But he agreed. He said he wouldn't fight. Damien hugged her. His arms were warm, soothing. You did the right thing, he said, his voice low and confident. It was the only way, Leela. Now you are free. She pressed herself against him, her face buried in his chest. The word free echoed in her head, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was free from the lies, from Ethan, from the past. But somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, a fear stirred, thin as a needle. What if freedom is just another cage? I'm afraid, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What if I made a mistake? Damien pulled away and took her face in his hands, his eyes dark but warm. You didn't make a mistake. You chose yourself, Leela, and me. We will be together, as I promised. Do you believe me? She nodded, her tears soaking into his shirt. I believe, she lied, because she wanted to believe. He kissed her, his lips soft but insistent, as if he was trying to erase her doubts. Leela answered, her arms wrapped around him, and the loft again became their refuge, where there was no pain, only passion and promises. She melted into him, letting his warmth drown out the voice in her head that whispered about the consequences. Meanwhile, Ethan remained in the house, which now seemed alien to him. He sat on the sofa, looking at the fragments of the vase that no one had removed. His hand shook, but he did not cry. The tears were somewhere deep, behind the wall that he had built. He thought about Leela, about her words, about how she looked at him as if he were a stranger. He thought about the man he didn't know but hated with all his heart. He stood up, walked over to the bar and poured whiskey into a new mug. The alcohol burned my throat, but did not dull the pain. Ethan withdrew into himself, like an animal driven into a corner. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. A part of him died today, and he wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to get it back. Leela stood at the loft window, looking at the lights of Austin, feeling how freedom mixed with emptiness. She had made a choice, but the cost of that choice was just beginning to emerge. The loft on South Congress became Leela Bennett's new home, her personal oasis where Austin seemed brighter and life fuller. Brick walls, huge windows overlooking neon lights, and black silk sheets created an atmosphere in which she felt not only alive, but welcome and free. Damian Reed was the center of this world, his presence filling the space with warmth, passion, and promises that she still wanted to believe. A month had passed since she confessed to Ethan that she had cheated on her and left, and although the divorce had not yet been finalized, Leela could already see herself in a new life with Damian, without a past, without guilt. This evening was one of many they spent together. The loft was decorated with candles, their soft light reflected in the glasses of wine. On the table was food from a fancy restaurant on 6th Street steaks with truffle oil, goat cheese salad, a dessert they never tried because their hands were full of each other. Leela sat on the couch, her bare feet resting on Damian's lap and his fingers lazily stroking her ankle. She was wearing his shirt, too big for her, with the sleeves rolled up, and her dark hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Have you ever thought that everything could be like this? She asked. Her voice was sleepy, but there was genuine joy in it. Just so easy. Damien smiled, his dark eyes sparkling in the candlelight. He took a sip of wine, his movements were relaxed, but they had that confidence that always attracted her. Easily? He grinned, his hand sliding higher up her leg. You call it easy after everything we've been through? Leela laughed, throwing her head back on the sofa. Well, maybe not easy, but that's right. It's like I'm finally in my place. He leaned down, his lips touched her neck, leaving a light mark. You're in the right place, Leela. With me, and I'm not going to let you go. Her heart skipped a beat, and she turned to kiss him. The kiss was slow, deep, soaked in wine and their shared euphoria. Leela felt as if she was flying without the burden of lies, without the burden of a marriage that had long ago become a cage. Damien was her air, her fire, and she lost herself in him, letting her passion drown out everything else. They talked about the future, as they did almost every night. Damien painted pictures of their life, a house in the Texas hills overlooking the sunset where they would drink bourbon on the porch, trips to Mexico where they would dance to street guitars, an agency they would turn into an empire. Leela listened, her eyes shone, and she believed not because it was all real, but because she wanted to believe. "What if we just run away?" she said. Her voice was half joking, but there was a sense of melancholy in it. "Let's leave everything, the office, clients, Austin. Let's start again somewhere where no one knows us." Damien smiled, but his gaze became distant for a second. "Run away?" He shook his head, his fingers resting on her leg. "We're not the type to run, Leela. We are building, and we will build something great here." She nodded, but something in his tone, a slight evasiveness, made her frown. "You're right," she said, trying to brush off the feeling. "It's just, sometimes you want things to be simpler." He leaned down, his lips found hers, and the kiss erased her doubts like the wind erases footprints in the sand. "Everything is just fine," he whispered, his breath warm on her skin. "You and me. That's all that matters." Their days were full of passion and small rituals that Leela began to consider as her own. Morning coffee in bed when Damien brought her a cup, still warm from his hands. Evenings in restaurants where they sat in the corner, their knees touching under the table, and his gaze made her forget the world. Nights in the loft where they loved each other with greed, as if they were afraid that time would slip away. Leela felt like a new woman, not the one hiding in the suburbs, but the one who shone like the neon of 6th Street. But there were moments that disrupted this euphoria. Sometimes Damien would become distant, his mind somewhere else. He would interrupt their conversation to answer the phone, retreating to a corner of the loft or onto the balcony, where his voice would become quieter. Leela noticed this, but every time she tried to ask, he waved it off with a smile, saying that it was clients or some crisis in the office. One evening, after dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Colorado River, they returned to the loft. Leela sat on the windowsill, looking out over the city, while Damien checked his phone. His face was serious, his fingers quickly typing out a message. She watched him, her heart squeezing with a slight pang of anxiety. "Everything is fine?" she asked. Her voice was light, but there was a sense of wariness in it. He looked up, his smile appearing after a second's delay. "Yes, just work. One client panics again." Leela nodded, but didn't look away. "You often answer calls at night. Are these still clients?" Damien placed the phone on the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked towards her, his hands resting on her hips, pulling her closer. "Leela, don't start," he said, his voice soft but with a slight hint of irritation. "You know how my business works. Someone always wants my attention." She looked into his eyes, trying to find the truth. "I just want to know what's going on. We talk about the future, but sometimes you're not here somewhere." He sighed, his fingers squeezing her hips a little tighter. "I'm here, Leela, with you. Everything else is just noise. Do you trust me?" Her heart trembled, but she nodded. He kissed her, his lips insistent, as if he wanted to erase her questions. Leela responded, letting her passion drown out her anxiety. She wanted to believe him, wanted to drown in their euphoria, and while his hands slid over her body, she could almost forget about her doubts. But doubts returned, like shadows in the corner of the loft. Leela began to notice little things, how Damien would sometimes check his phone when he thought she was sleeping, how he avoided talking about his divorce from Claire, changing the subject with an ease that seemed too practiced. She tried to brush it off, telling herself that he was busy, that divorce was complicated, that he loved her. But every secret call, every evasive, "we'll talk later," left tiny cracks in her chest. One night, after another passionate encounter, they lay in bed, their bodies still warm. Leela looked at the ceiling, her fingers lazily drawing patterns on his chest. "When will you talk to Claire?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost weightless. "You said that you already talked to the lawyer, but what next?" Damien tensed, his breathing hitching for a second. He turned, his eyes dark but evasive. "Leela, it's not that simple," he said. His voice was soft, but there was a wall in it. "There is property, contracts, a lot of everything. I'm working on it." She sat up, the sheets sliding off her shoulders. "But you promised, Damien. You said you would leave her." I left Ethan, I gave up everything for us. And you don't even say when it will end. He sat up, his hand touched her shoulder, but she pulled away. Hey, don't make a problem out of this, he said, his voice sharper. I said I'd figure it out, and I will figure it out. You know that I want to be with you. Leela looked at him, her eyes shining with the tears she was holding back. Then why do I feel like you're hiding something? Why do you walk away when the phone rings? Why don't I know where you are when you're not with me? Damien sighed, his face hardening. Because I'm not your husband, Leela. I don't have to account for every step. You wanted freedom. I gave it to you. Now you want me in a cage. His words hit like a slap in the face. Leela froze, her throat constricting. I don't want you in a cage, she said, her voice shaking. I want to know that we are building something real. That I'm not just your lover. He softened, his hand touching her again, more gently this time. You are not a lover. You are everything to me. Just give me time, okay? I'll deal with Claire, this mess. We will be together, as I promised. Leela nodded, but her heart was heavy. She lay back down, allowing him to hug her, but sleep did not come. She looked at the lights of Austin outside the window, and the euphoria that once filled her now seemed fragile, like glass. As the days passed, Leela continued to live in her bubble. She went to work where her ideas shined. She dined with Damien at fancy places. She lost herself in his arms. But shadows of doubt grew, and she could not ignore them. Every time he walked away to answer the phone, every time he changed the subject, she felt her faith in their future crack. But she clung to the euphoria, to the moments when his gaze made her the center of the world. She told herself that he loved her, that he would keep his promises. And as Austin's neon glowed outside the loft windows, she could almost believe it. Austin was still shining, but for Leela Bennett his neon shine was beginning to fade. The loft on South Congress, once her sanctuary, now seemed too big, too empty when Damien wasn't around, and his absence became more and more noticeable. For the last 2 weeks he had been distant, his smiles less frequent, his touches shorter. He canceled dinners, citing urgent matters, and increasingly left to answer calls, closing the balcony door behind him. Leela tried not to notice, convincing herself that it was temporary, that he was just busy, but her heart sank with anxiety that she could not ignore. Added to this was her own illness. Morning bouts of nausea, fatigue that came in waves, even after a full sleep, and a strange sensitivity to smells the coffee she loved now disgusted her. She put it all down to stress. Her divorce from Ethan, which was dragging on due to disputes over the house, pressure at work, where her campaigns demanded more and more attention, and, most importantly, tension with Damien. But somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, a thought stirred that made her blood run cold. Leela spent this evening alone in the loft. Damien wrote that he would be in the office late, and his message was short, almost cold. Don't wait, go to bed. She sat on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, with a glass of wine, which she never drank. Her gaze slid around the room brick walls, candles that had not been lit for a long time, the bed where their passion once burned brighter than neon. Now everything seemed to her like decoration, beautiful, but empty. What's wrong with you? She muttered, turning to herself. Her voice was quiet, but in the empty loft it sounded louder than she expected. She stood up, walked over to the bathroom mirror, and looked at her reflection. Dark circles under her eyes, pale skin, hair that she didn't bother to style. She looked tired, but not only that, something in her face had changed, something she couldn't place. Her phone vibrated on the table, and she jumped. It wasn't Damien, but a message from a colleague, Ray, who she sometimes chatted with in the office. Are you okay? She didn't look good today. Leela frowned, her fingers hovering over the screen. She didn't want anyone to notice, but apparently her condition was more obvious than she thought. I'm just tired, she wrote back, but her fingers were trembling. She knew that this was not the whole truth. Something was wrong, and she could no longer pretend that everything was under control. The next day, Leela took a day off from Blaze Media, citing a migraine. Damien was in the office, but didn't even ask how she was feeling, just nodded to her message and left for another meeting. His indifference stung, but she shrugged it off, deciding to focus on herself. She drove to a pharmacy on the outskirts of Austin, away from South Congress, where she might be recognized. Standing in front of the shelf of pregnancy tests, she felt her heart pounding. Her fingers trembled as she took the box, the simplest one, without unnecessary promises of 99% accuracy or early results. She just needed the truth. The cashier, an elderly woman with tired eyes, pushed through the purchase without question, but Leela still felt her cheeks burning. She stuffed the box into her bag and walked out, her steps fast, almost panicked. She sat in the car for a minute, looking at the box that now lay on the passenger seat. The thought of pregnancy was both frightening and absurd. She couldn't be pregnant. Not now. Not with Damien, who promised a future but increasingly eluded her. Returning to the loft, Leela locked herself in the bathroom. She unpacked the test, her hands shaking so much that she almost dropped the instructions. Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, she waited, her breathing uneven. The minutes dragged on like hours, and when she finally looked at the test, her world froze. 2 stripes. Clear, undeniable. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "No, no, no." She took the test, her fingers gripping the plastic as if she could make the result disappear. But it was there, real, like her nausea, like her fatigue, like her fear. Leela sank to the floor, her back pressed against the cold tiles. She was pregnant, and she didn't know what to do about it. Damien returned to the loft late that evening, his shirt wrinkled and his eyes tired. Leela sat on the couch, the test hidden in her bag, but its presence felt like a bomb with a ticking timer. She looked at Damien, trying to find in him the man who promised her a future, but she saw only his aloofness. "Are you okay?" he asked, but his voice was distracted, as if he was already thinking about something else. He poured himself a bourbon without even offering it to her. "Not really," she answered, her voice quiet but firm. "We need to talk." He turned, his eyebrows raised. "About what?" There was a slight wariness in his tone that did not escape her. Leela swallowed, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. "You've been kind of distant lately. You cancel plans, go on calls, don't say what's going on. I want to know if everything is okay between us." Damien sighed, his hand running through his hair. He sat down opposite her, but did not touch her as he had done before. "Leela, I'm busy. You know how it works. Clients, projects, Claire. It all takes time." Her heart sank at the mention of Claire. "Claire?" she asked, her voice becoming sharper. "You said you would leave her, that you are already with a lawyer. But I don't see any progress, Damien. Only your calls that you hide." He frowned, his eyes darkening. "Are you on your own again? I said I'll sort it out. It's not as easy as you think." "Then explain." Her voice broke, she stood up, her hands trembling. "I gave up everything for us. I left Ethan, I live in this loft, I'm waiting for you, and you can't even say when you'll be free." Damien stood up, his movements harsh. "Leela, that's enough. I'm not your husband to account for every step. You wanted freedom, I gave it to you. Now you want to control me?" His words hit like a slap in the face. Leela froze, her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. "I don't want to control you," she said, her voice hoarse. "I want to know that we are building something real. That I'm not just your toy." He softened, his hand touched her shoulder, but she pulled away. "You are not a toy," he said, his voice becoming quieter. "You are everything to me. Just give me time, okay? I'll figure it out." Leela looked at him, her heart torn between love and fear. She wanted to tell him about the test, about the child that could be their future or their end. But his evasiveness, his coldness stopped her. She couldn't trust him, not now. "Okay," she lied, her voice barely audible. "I'll wait." He smiled, but the smile was forced. He kissed her forehead, but the kiss was empty, like his promises. When he went into the shower, Leela was left alone. Her hand involuntarily lay on her stomach. She felt her world cracking, and the test in her bag was just the beginning. The next day, Leela drove to downtown Austin to meet with a divorce lawyer. The meeting was short but exhausting. Ethan agreed to the division of property, but his signature on the documents seemed to her the last nail in their past. She left the office, her legs were weak, and one thought was spinning in her head. She was pregnant, and the man for whom she had given up everything was slipping away from her. In the evening she returned to the loft, but Damien was not there. He left a note, "I'll be late, don't wait up." Leela sat down on the bed, her fingers squeezing the test she had taken out of her bag. She looked at the two stripes, and her thoughts swirled like a whirlwind. Child, their child. This could be the beginning of a new life or the end of everything she had built. She wanted to call Damien, tell him, but his distance, his secret calls stopped her. Instead, she lay down, her hand still on her stomach, and for the first time in a long time she felt alone. Austin's neon was burning outside the window, but its light no longer warmed her. The alarm bells she had tried to ignore were now louder, and she knew the truth would soon come out. Austin woke up under the hot sun. Its streets were already shaking from the haze, and the air was saturated with the smell of coffee and asphalt. Leela Bennett sat in the sterile waiting room of a clinic on the outskirts of the city, her fingers nervously fiddling with the edge of her bag. She chose this clinic because it was far from South Congress, far from the prying eyes of colleagues or acquaintances. Her heart was pounding as she waited for the doctor, and although the pregnancy test had already shown 2 lines, she still clung to the hope that it was a mistake, that her life would not become even more complicated. The doctor's office was small, with faded health posters on the walls. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, looked at the test results and looked at Leela over her glasses. "Congratulations, Miss Bennett," she said, her voice soft but professional. "You are pregnant. About 6 weeks." Leela froze, her breathing hitched. The word congratulations echoed in her head, but she didn't know whether to be happy or panic. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice hoarse, almost a whisper. The doctor nodded, her smile becoming warmer. "Absolutely. Analyses confirm this. Want to discuss next steps? Do you have any questions?" Leela shook her head, her thoughts confused. "No. I'll think about it. Thank you." She left the clinic, her legs were weak, and a storm of emotions was raging in her chest. The pregnancy was real, not just 2 lines on a test, but a life growing inside her. She imagined a child with her eyes, or maybe Damien's dark eyes. This thought caused a strange mixture of fear and delight. She loved Damien, believed in their future, despite his recent distance. The child could be their new beginning, their anchor that would bind them forever. Leela got into the car, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. She knew she had to tell Damien. Today, right now. She couldn't keep it to herself, couldn't wait for him to cancel plans again or go off on another secret call. She wanted to see his face, his smile, his promises that he repeated on their best nights. She wanted to believe that he would be as excited as she was. The Blaze Media office was full of the usual buzz. Phones ringing, keyboards clattering, colleagues laughing in the creative room. Leela walked in, her heels clicking on the marble floor and her heart beating so loudly that she was afraid everyone would hear it. She didn't warn Damien, thinking a surprise would be better. She imagined how he would hug her, how his eyes would light up, how he would say that this was exactly what he wanted. His office was on the top floor, with picture windows overlooking Austin. Leela knocked, her hand trembling, but she forced herself to smile. "Come in," came his voice, low but slightly irritated. She opened the door and entered. Damien sat at the table, his dark hair disheveled and his shirt unbuttoned at the top button. The phone lay in front of him, the screen still glowing, as if he had just finished a call. He looked up and his face softened for a second, but then his usual wariness returned. "Leela?" He frowned, leaning back in his chair. "What are you doing here? I thought you were taking the day off." She closed the door, her smile nervous but sincere. "I went to the doctor," she said, her voice quiet but full of hope. "And I have news." Damien raised an eyebrow, his gaze more intense, but there was no warmth in it. "News? Which?" Leela took a step closer, her hands clenched into fists to stop shaking. I'm pregnant, Damien. 6 weeks. This is our child. The words hung in the air, and for a second it seemed to her that time had stopped. She waited for his reaction, a smile, a hug, anything that would confirm her hope. But instead Damien's face darkened, his eyes narrowed, and his jaw tensed. He stood up, his movements were sharp, almost threatening. Pregnant, he repeated, his voice was low, but there was a rage in it that Leela did not expect. Are you serious? She froze, her smile fading. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. I thought you'd be happy. This is our child, Damien. He laughed, but the laughter was cold and cruel. Are you glad? Leela, are you completely crazy? Do you think I need this? This degenerate from the office litter. Her heart stopped. The words hit like a knife, and she felt her world crumble. What? She whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Damien, how can you? He stepped towards her, his face contorted with anger. How can I? It's you, Leela. Do you think I'll give up everything for you and your baby? I have a wife, Leela. Beloved wife. Claire is my future, and you. You were just entertainment. A mistake. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she could not move. But you promised, she breathed, her voice hoarse, broken. You said that you would leave her, that we would be together. Did you promise? He laughed again, his voice full of contempt. I said what you wanted to hear so that you would spread your legs. And you believed it like a naive girl. And now you brought this problem to me, thinking that I would become the father of your bastard. Leela trembled, her hands instinctively falling on her stomach, protecting the life that had not yet been born. Don't call him that, she said, her voice weak but steely in it. This is our child, Damien. You can't just. She didn't have time to finish. Damien stepped closer, his hand flying and the blow landing on her cheek. Leela staggered back, her back hit the wall, and her cheek burned with pain. She gasped, her eyes widening in shock and her tears flowing faster. Get out, he growled, his voice filled with rage. Get out of my office, out of my life, and don't you dare come back with that crap. Leela looked at him, her body trembling, and the world around her was collapsing. The man she loved, for whom she had given up everything, stood before her like a stranger, his eyes full of hatred. She wanted to scream, to hit him, but her legs were already carrying her to the door. She grabbed her bag, her heels clicking on the floor, and she ran out of the office without looking back. The office corridors were empty, the employees had already gone home. Leela rushed into the women's bathroom, her breathing uneven and tears streaming down her face. She locked the door, her back pressed against the cold tiles, and she slid to the floor, hugging her knees. Her cheeks still burned, but the pain in her chest was stronger, the pain of betrayal, shattered hopes, broken love. How could I? She whispered. Her voice was hoarse, broken. How could I be so stupid? She thought about Damien, about his promises, about the loft where they built dreams. It was all a lie, a beautiful decoration behind which the cruel truth was hidden. He never intended to leave Claire. He never loved her. She was just a game for him, but now, with a child, she is a threat. Leela pressed her hand to her stomach, her fingers trembling. Child. Her child. She didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. She wouldn't let Damien destroy this life like he destroyed her heart. She cried, her tears fell onto the tiles, but a spark grew in her chest, not of love, not of hope, but of determination. She will survive. For your own sake. For the sake of the child. Austin was still shining outside the window, but for Leela his light had gone out. She sat in the dark of the bathroom. Her world was in ruins, but she knew that this was not the end. This was the start of something new, even if she didn't see the path yet. Leela Bennett walked through the streets of Austin, her steps unsteady, as if the ground beneath her feet had become unsteady. The sky was gray, and occasional drops of rain fell on her face, mixing with the trail of tears that she couldn't stop. His cheek still burned from Damien's blow, but the pain in his chest was worse, burning, tearing like an open wound. His words, office crap, geek, mistake, replayed in her head like a broken record, and each repetition tore her heart anew. She didn't know where she was going, but her feet led her to the suburbs, to the house she once shared with Ethan. The house looked alien. Its white walls and neat lawn seemed like decoration from a past life. Leela stopped at the porch, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She hadn't been here since the night she confessed to cheating, and now, standing in front of the door, she felt like an intruder. Ethan was probably inside, but she couldn't knock. Not after everything she's done. Instead, she sat down on the steps, her bag falling next to her, and gave free rein to her tears. The rain intensified, soaking her dress, but Leela did not move. She cried all night, her sobs mixed with the sound of the rain, and the memories of Damien, of his lies, of his cruelty drowned her like waves. She thought about the child, about how to tell him that his father didn't want him, that he called him a mistake. She thought about herself, about how she had ruined her life for a man who never loved her. And she thought about Ethan, about his pain, which she ignored in order to chase the illusion. By morning the rain stopped, leaving behind dampness and cold. Leela stood up, her body stiff and her eyes swollen. She couldn't stay here, couldn't go back to the loft where everything reminded her of Damien. But she knew she had to move forward, even if she couldn't see the way. She stood up, picked up her bag, and drove into downtown Austin to Blaze Media. Her job was the only thing she had left, and she clung to it like a lifeline. The morning in the office was normal. The hum of voices, the smell of coffee, the clatter of keyboards. Leela came in, her hair was damp and her dress was wrinkled. She tried to act confident, but her face, pale and swollen from tears, gave her away. Her colleagues glanced at her, some with curiosity, some with pity, but no one spoke. She walked towards the elevator, her heels clicking on the marble, but the sound seemed foreign to her, as if she no longer belonged here. At the entrance to the office, she was stopped by a security guard, a man of about 50 with a stern face. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice was even, but there was a sense of firmness in it. "You can't come here." Leela froze, her bag sliding off her shoulder. "What?" she asked, her voice hoarse from fatigue. "I work here. I have projects, I." The guard shook his head, his hand resting on her shoulder, gently but firmly pulling her back. "I'm sorry, but I have orders. Your things are here." He pointed to a cardboard box standing at the security desk. It contained her notebooks, photographs, and a coffee mug with the agency logo. And this. He handed her a sealed envelope. Leela took the envelope, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside was a letter, short and cold, printed on Blaze Media letterhead. "Dear Miss Bennett, your employment with Blaze Media has been terminated as of today due to a violation of professional ethics and a conflict of interest. We ask you to vacate your workplace and return all company property. Sincerely, Damian Reed, CEO." Her breathing hitched. The letter fell out of her hands, falling to the floor. "This is a mistake," she whispered, her eyes flickering to the guard. I need to talk to Damien. This is not true, Miss," the guard interrupted, his voice becoming stern. "Mr. Reed has made it clear that you are not to enter. Please take your things and leave." Leela looked at the box, at the letter, at the guard, and her world collapsed. Damien didn't just hit her, didn't just reject their child, he cut her out of his life, as if she never existed. She wanted to scream, to burst into his office, to force him to look into her eyes, but her legs would not obey. She took the box, her hand shaking so much that she almost dropped it, and walked out of the building. Outside, the rain began again, lightly but cold. Leela stood on the sidewalk, the box got wet in her hands, and tears flowed down her cheeks. She lost her job, the place where she felt alive, where her ideas shined. She lost Damien, the man she ruined her marriage for. And now she stood in the middle of Austin, pregnant, homeless, penniless. Leela returned to the loft because she didn't know where else to go. The door was open, and her heart sank when she saw a note on the table, written in Damien's hand. "Leela, vacate the loft by the end of the week. I don't pay for it anymore. Don't try to contact me. D." She sank onto the sofa, her box of belongings falling to the floor, and the note crumpled in her hand. The loft that had been their sanctuary, their dream, was now just an empty room saturated with lies. She looked at the silk sheets, at the candles they lit on the best nights, and felt her heart break. Damien didn't just reject her, he kicked her out like a dog, stripping her of everything she had built. Leela lay down on the bed, her body curled up into a ball, and the tears flowed again. She cried for herself, for the child, for all her mistakes. She thought about Ethan, about the way he looked at her the night she confessed to cheating. She had destroyed him, and now she herself was destroyed. She thought about the child, about how to raise him without a father, without a home, without hope. And she thought about Damien, about his cold eyes, about his hand that hit her, and a hatred she had never known began to grow in her chest. By morning, Leela was exhausted, her eyes were red, and her voice was hoarse from sobbing. She stood up, her movements mechanical, and began to collect her things. She had no plan, no money, no future. She put her clothes in her suitcase, took the box of clothes from her office, and looked at the loft one last time. This place had been her dream, but now it was just a reminder of her stupidity. She went outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. Leela stood with a suitcase and a box, her gaze sliding over South Congress, over the neon that no longer beckoned her. She was in complete despair, but somewhere in the depths of her consciousness a spark stirred. She didn't know how she would survive, but she knew that she had to for the sake of the child, for herself. Austin was cruel, but she wasn't broken yet. Not really. Austin, with its neon signs and hot streets, became a labyrinth with no way out for Leela Bennett. It had been a week since she left the loft on South Congress, taking with her a suitcase, a box of belongings, and a broken heart. Her life, once full of passion and dreams, was now reduced to a few dollars in her wallet and a room in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The Starlight Motel was shabby, with stains on the carpet and a damp smell, but it was all she could afford. Leela lay on a narrow bed, looking at the cracked ceiling, her hand involuntarily touching her stomach, where new life was growing. She was lonely, scared, and at rock bottom, but her baby was her only anchor. The search for work was in vain. Leela sent dozens of resumes to advertising agencies, startups, even small publishers, but everywhere she received refusals or silence. Her reputation at Blaze Media was in ruins, and rumors of her dismissal spread faster than she expected. She suspected Damien had a hand in this, perhaps by spreading gossip or directly contacting industry colleagues. Her name, once associated with brilliant campaigns, was now tarnished. She went to interviews, but employers either smiled evasively or directly said that they have no vacancies. Each rejection was like a blow, and her confidence melted like ice under the Texas sun. The money was running out. Leela sold several pieces of jewelry, including the ring Ethan gave her for her engagement. It was painful, but she had no choice. Motel, food, and bus tickets required payment. She ate cheap fast food sandwiches, drank tap water, and tried not to think about how far she had fallen. At night, in the darkness of the motel room, she cried, her tears soaking into the thin pillow. She mourned her naivety, her love for Damien, her life that she had destroyed with her own hands. This morning, Leela decided to try again. She put on the only decent suit she had left, a black jacket and skirt, slightly wrinkled, but clean. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her makeup hid the dark circles under her eyes. She took her bag with her resume and drove into downtown Austin to 6th Street, where several small agencies had offices. She walked around 3 places, but everywhere it was the same. Polite smiles, promises to call, and glances full of doubt. By midday, she was exhausted, her legs were aching, and her hope was fading. She walked into a coffee shop on 6th Street, a small place with wooden tables and the smell of freshly brewed espresso. Leela ordered the cheapest coffee, counting out the change from her wallet, and sat in the corner, looking out at the street through the foggy window. Austin was bustling with life. Tourists, street musicians, couples laughing over cocktails. She felt like a ghost, invisible in this bright world. The coffee shop door dinged, and Leela looked up. Her heart sank. Ethan came in. He looked tired, his dark hair was disheveled, and his jeans and shirt were wrinkled, as if he hadn't slept in days. He held a paper cup in his hands, and his gaze slid around the hall until it settled on her. Their eyes met, and Leela felt her throat tighten. She wanted to get up and leave, but her legs wouldn't obey. Ethan approached, his steps slow, as if he was weighing whether to do this. "Leela," he said, his voice hoarse, but not with anger, only with weariness. "What are you doing here?" She swallowed, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Just drinking coffee," she lied, her voice weak. "And you?" He looked at her, his brown eyes studying her face pallor, dark circles, trembling hands. "You look terrible," he said directly, without malice, but his words cut. Leela tried to smile, but the smile came out crooked. "Thanks for the compliment. I'm fine." Ethan sat down opposite him without asking permission. He placed the glass on the table, his fingers nervously fiddling with the lid. "Don't lie," he said, his voice becoming quieter. "I know you, Leela. Something's wrong. What's happened?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned away, looking out the window so he couldn't see. But the tears flowed anyway, and she couldn't stop them. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shook, and sobs burst out, loud, uncontrollable. People at the neighboring tables looked around, but Leela didn't care. She was at the bottom, and there was no strength to pretend anymore. "It's all gone, Ethan," she breathed, her voice hoarse with tears. "Everything I built. It was all a lie." He looked at her, his face motionless, but a shadow of pain flashed in his eyes. "Tell me," he said. His voice was even, but there was tension in it. "What did he do?" Leela removed her hands from her face, her cheeks were wet and her eyes were red. She knew she shouldn't reveal that Ethan hated her for what she had done to their marriage, but the words gushed out like water from a broken dam. "Damien, he's not who I thought he was," she began, her voice shaking. "He promised me everything: love, future, freedom. I left you for him, Ethan, and I was such a fool. He never intended to leave his wife. He called me a litter, and when I told him I was pregnant, he hit me. He said that the child was a mistake, that he didn't want him." Ethan froze, his hands clenched into fists and his jaw tense. "Did he hit you?" he asked. His voice was low, dangerous. "Did that bastard lay his hand on you?" Leela nodded, her tears flowing faster. "And then he fired me. Kicked out of the loft. I have nothing, Ethan. No job, no home, no money. I'm spending the night in a motel. I don't know how to live anymore." She covered her face with her hands. Her sobs became quieter, but deeper, as if she was spitting out all the pain that she carried inside herself. Ethan looked at her. His face was a storm of emotions: anger, pity, resentment. He hated her for the betrayal, for the way she destroyed their marriage, but seeing her like this, broken, pregnant, abandoned, was beyond his strength. His fists unclenched, and he ran a hand through his hair, trying to gain control of himself. "Damn, Leela," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "How did you come to this?" She shook her head, her eyes full of despair. "I don't know. I thought I was doing the right thing, that I was looking for myself. But I lost everything. And now I only have this child, and I don't even know how to protect him." Ethan looked at her, his chest heaving. He wanted to leave her with her problems, which she herself created. But the thought of her, pregnant, alone, in a cheap motel, was unbearable. He hated her, but couldn't leave her. "Do you have a place to stay?" he asked, his voice strained, as if the words were difficult for him. Leela shook her head, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Motel. But the money is running out. I don't know what to do." Ethan sighed, his gaze falling on her hands, trembling, thin, without a wedding ring. He knew he would regret it, but he couldn't help it. "You can stay with me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. 2 weeks, Leela, until you find something of your own. But this is not about us, not about reconciliation. Because I can't watch you live like this, not with a child." Leela looked up, her face wet with tears. "Ethan, you don't have to," she whispered, her voice wavering. "After everything I've done." "You don't have to," he interrupted, his voice becoming harsher. "But I do it. 2 weeks. and you will find a way out." She nodded, her tears falling onto the table. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely audible. I, I don't deserve this." Ethan didn't answer. He stood up, his movements abrupt, as if he was afraid of changing his mind. "Pack your things. I'll be home in an hour." He left without looking back, leaving her in the coffee shop with an empty glass and a new spark of hope mixed with wine. Leela sat, her hands shaking, but for the first time in weeks, she felt that she was not completely alone. Austin was still cruel, but there was a person in him who, despite the pain, extended his hand to her. And she knew that she had to grab onto it, for the sake of the child, for her own sake. The Bennett home, once filled with laughter and warmth, was now cold, like an autumn evening outside the windows. Leela Bennett had only returned here 2 days ago, after meeting Ethan at the coffee shop on 6th Street, but the place no longer felt like home. The walls, once decorated with photographs of them together, were bare, and the furniture seemed alien, as if it belonged to another life. Leela sat in the living room, her suitcase and box of belongings still standing by the door, unpacked as a reminder of her temporary status. She was here at Ethan's mercy, and the thought burned like an open wound. Her hand involuntarily lay on her stomach, where the child was growing, about whom she tried to think with hope and not with fear. Ethan gave her 2 weeks to find a place to live, but her job search was still unsuccessful and her money was running out faster than she could afford. She felt trapped, but there was a false hope in the depths of her heart, hope that maybe she could bring Ethan back, bring back at least some of the life she had destroyed. It was stupid, she knew, but desperation made her cling to every opportunity. Today, she decided to try it. Leela put on Ethan's old sweatshirt that she found in her closet gray, with a faded Longhorns logo, and scented with his scent. It was too big, the sleeves hung down, but in it Leela felt closer to him, to their past. She stood at the stove, preparing dinner spaghetti with meat sauce, his favorite dish, which she had cooked when they first got married. The smell of tomatoes and basil filled the kitchen, and for a second Leela allowed herself to believe that everything could be the same. Ethan returned home around 7, his steps heavy and tired. He threw the keys on the table by the entrance, his dark hair was disheveled and his eyes were cold, as if he had built a wall between himself and the world. Seeing Leela at the stove, he froze, his eyebrows furrowed. "What is this?" he asked. His voice was even, but there was a sense of wariness in it. Leela turned, her smile nervous but sincere. "Dinner," she said, trying to sound light. "I thought we should eat together. Like, like before." Ethan looked at her, his gaze sliding over the sweatshirt, over her face, over the table, where plates and a bottle of cheap wine were already standing. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he did not answer, simply nodded and sat down at the table. Leela felt a pang of hope. He did not leave, did not refuse. Maybe this was an opportunity. She placed the plate in front of him, her hands shaking, but she hid it as she sat down opposite him. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice soft, almost timid. Ethan shrugged, his fork lazily picking at the spaghetti. As usual, work orders, nothing new. His tone was cold, distant, but Leela did not give up. "I sent out a couple more resumes today," she said, trying to fill the silence. "There is one agency in Dallas. They are looking for a copywriter. Maybe something will work out." He nodded without looking up. "Fine. The sooner the better." Her heart sank, but she forced herself to smile. "Ethan, I know it's complicated, but I'm really grateful that you let me stay. I, I wish we could at least talk, like friends." He finally looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Friends." His voice was harsh, with a slight mockery. "Leela, are you serious? After everything you've done, do you want to be friends?" She looked down, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "That's not what I meant," she said quietly. I want there to be no hatred between us. For, for the sake of the child." Ethan put down his fork, his movements jerky. "Don't bring the child into this," he said, his voice growing louder. "You chose this path yourself, Leela. You left, you changed, you destroyed everything. And now you're sitting here in my sweatshirt, cooking dinner like that's going to make a difference. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. I'm not trying to pretend nothing happened, she said, her voice shaking. I know I'm to blame. But I thought maybe we could start over, not like before, but somehow. Ethan laughed, but it was a bitter, joyless laugh. Start again? Leela, can you even hear yourself? I have a life. I have Sarah. Her heart sank. Sarah? She asked. Her voice was barely audible. Ethan nodded, his gaze hardening. Yes, Sarah. We met a couple of months ago. She's not you, Leela. She's honest. She doesn't lie. She doesn't run after other people's husbands. And I'm not going to give up everything for you to try to return what you yourself destroyed. Leela felt her world crumble again. She knew Ethan had the right to move on, but hearing about another woman, that he had found someone, was like a blow. I didn't know, she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. I just wanted. What did you want? He interrupted, his voice as cold as steel. So that I can forgive you. To pretend you didn't break my heart? You made your choice, Leela. You chose him. And now you're pregnant, without a job, without a home, because he turned out to be the same shit as you. His words were like a slap in the face, and Leela trembled, her tears finally flowing. I know I'm guilty, she breathed, her voice hoarse. I know I ruined everything. But I don't want to lose you completely, Ethan. You're the only one left. Ethan stood up, his fists clenching, but he controlled himself. You lost me when you went to him, he said, his voice quieter but full of pain. I gave you 2 weeks, Leela. 2 weeks to find a place to live, a job, whatever. But this is not about us. This is not about second chances. This is because I don't want you and your child to end up on the street. But don't confuse this with love. Leela covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice broken. Sorry for everything. Ethan looked at her, his face a mask of anger and pity. He wanted to hate her, wanted to kick her out right now, but the sight of her pregnant, in his sweatshirt, crying at their old table tore his heart. He turned away, his hands shaking. 2 weeks, he repeated, his voice cold but firm. Find a way out, Leela. I'm not your savior. He went into the bedroom, slamming the door, leaving her alone in the kitchen. The spaghetti was cold, the wine sat untouched, and Ethan's sweatshirt, which Leela had hoped would be a bridge to the past, now seemed like a shroud to her. She cried, her tears fell on the table, and the false hope she had nourished died in her completely. Austin was still shining outside the window, but for Leela he was empty, like her future. 2 weeks was all she had left, and she knew she had to find a way to get back up, even if her heart was broken. Now Leela lived in this house like a ghost, trying to remain invisible while she looked for work and housing. Her days were filled with sending resumes, calling agencies, and getting rejected after rejection, and her nights were filled with tears and fear for the future of the child she was carrying. Ethan remained distant, his presence heavy as storm clouds, and Leela felt that her time was running out. It was a quiet evening, except for the faint noise of the television coming from the living room. Leela sat in the small guest room where Ethan had allowed her to stay. Her suitcase and box of belongings still stood against the wall, half unpacked, as a symbol of her uncertainty. She was scrolling through job advertisements on an old laptop, her eyes burning with fatigue and her fingers trembling from endless scrolling. She found a couple of jobs freelance copywriting and an assistant at a local publishing house, but the chances were slim. Her reputation, tarnished by her dismissal from Blaze Media, hung over her like a curse. Suddenly, laughter came from the living room, deep, warm, the one that Leela once loved. It was Ethan, but it was followed by another voice, female, light, with a playful intonation. Leela froze, her heart sank. She recognized this voice, although she had never heard it in person. Sarah. Ethan had mentioned her a week ago, and now she was here, in their home, in their living room, where Leela had once dreamed of the future. Leela closed her laptop, her breathing becoming uneven. She didn't want to eavesdrop, didn't want to see, but her feet carried her to the door. She opened it slightly, trying not to make a sound, and looked out into the corridor. The living room was visible through the slightly open door, and Leela saw them. Ethan was sitting on the sofa, his hand lay on the back, and a woman was sitting comfortably next to her. Sarah was younger than Leela, with short blonde hair and a bright smile. She held a glass of wine, her laughter ringing like a bell, and Ethan looked at her with a warmth that Leela hadn't seen in his eyes in a long time. "So do you really want to do this?" Sarah asked, her voice full of enthusiasm. "Move to Dallas. This is a big step." Ethan smiled, his hand casually touching her shoulder. "Why not? There are more workshop options there, and, I'm ready for change. With you." Sarah laughed, leaning closer. "You're so cute when you're trying to be serious. But I'm for it. New city, new home. Maybe we'll even get a dog." Leela felt her throat tighten. She pressed herself against the wall, her hand lay on her stomach, as if protecting the child from the pain that was tearing her apart. Ethan was planning a future not with her, but with Sarah. New city, new house, dog. Everything they had once dreamed of together now belonged to another woman. Leela closed her eyes, her tears flowing quietly but uncontrollably. She lost him forever, and this truth was the final blow that she could not withstand. She returned to the room, her movements mechanical. She sat down on the bed, her gaze fell on the suitcase, on the box, on the laptop, where the screen with advertisements was still burning. She couldn't stay here any longer, couldn't listen to their laughter, their plans, their happiness. Ethan gave her 2 weeks, but every minute in that house was torture. She had to leave not for him, but for herself, for the sake of a child who deserved a mother who could fight. Leela stood up, her hands trembling, but determination growing in her chest. She began packing, putting clothes in a suitcase and notebooks and a mug in a box. Her movements were fast, almost furious, as if she was trying to erase this house, this past from her life. She didn't know where she would go, but she knew she couldn't stay. The Starlight Motel, despite its dampness and squalor, was better than this cage filled with her mistakes. When the suitcase was packed, Leela put on her coat. Her gaze slid around the room one last time. She left Ethan's sweatshirt on the bed, gray with the Longhorns logo on it, a symbol of their past that she could no longer wear. She picked up the suitcase and box, her steps quiet so as not to attract attention. The living room was still ringing with Ethan and Sarah's laughter, and Leela walked past without looking back. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the Austin night air hit her coldly. The Starlight Motel greeted her with the familiar smell of dampness and creaking floorboards. Leela paid for the week, giving the last dollar she had. The room was the same as before: a narrow bed, threadbare carpet, a TV that didn't work. She placed the suitcase and box against the wall, her body trembling with fatigue, but she did not cry. The tears she had shed for Ethan, for Damien, for herself, had dried up. Now there was only determination in her, cold, hard, like steel. Leela sat down on the bed, her hand resting on her stomach. "We can handle this," she whispered, her voice hoarse but full of strength. "Just you and me. I won't let us break." She didn't know how she would find a job, how she would pay for a motel, how she would raise a child. But she knew that she would no longer cling to false hopes, to the men who betrayed her, to the past that destroyed her. Austin was cruel, but she was stronger than she thought. She will get up, even if it hurts, even if it takes everything she has. Leela lay down, her eyes looked at the ceiling, but for the first time in a long time, there was no fear in them. She fought for herself and her child, and that was the only thing that mattered. Austin's neon flickered outside the window, but now it was just a background, not a dream. Her future was in her hands, and she had no intention of letting it go. Austin was drenched in rain, its streets glistening with water, and the neon of 6th Street seemed washed out like a watercolor painting. Leela Bennett sat at the window of her room at the Starlight Motel, her eyes following the drops running down the glass. The rain was rhythmic, almost soothing, but it could not quell the storm in her chest. A week had passed since she left Ethan's house, taking with her a suitcase, a box of things, and the determination that was her only weapon. Her life was in ruins, but in this darkness she began to see a faint light, not hope, but stubbornness the desire to prove to herself and her child that she was not broken. The motel became her temporary refuge, although its dampness and creaky bed were reminders of how far she had fallen. The money was almost gone, and Leela knew she couldn't afford to sit idly by. She spent her days hitting the thresholds of eateries, cafes, and small offices, ready to take on any job. Her resume, once full of achievements at Blaze Media, was now gathering dust in a box. No one wanted a copywriter with a tarnished reputation. But Leela did not give up. She had to survive, for the sake of the child growing inside her, for her own sake. On the third day of her search, she walked into Dixie's Diner on the outskirts of Austin. The place was old-fashioned, with worn red sofas, the smell of frying bacon, and a jukebox playing country music. The waitress wanted sign hung on the door, and Leela entered, gritting her teeth. The manager, a woman named Martha with gray hair and stern eyes, looked at her skeptically. "Do you have any experience?" Martha asked, crossing her arms. Leela shook her head, her voice quiet but firm. "No, but I'm learning quickly, and I really need a job." Martha narrowed her eyes. Her eyes slid over Leela's pale face, over her threadbare coat. "You don't look like a waitress. What's the story?" Leela swallowed, her fingers tightening on the strap of her bag. "For me, everything is complicated. I'm pregnant, without a job, without a home. But I can handle it if you give me a chance." Martha was silent, her gaze softened, but did not become less penetrating. "Okay," she said finally. "Probationary period, a week. You pay for the uniform. If you break something, I'll deduct it from your salary. You start tomorrow at 7 in the morning." Leela nodded, her heart skipping a beat. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice shaking. "You won't regret it." Martha chuckled, but a shadow of sympathy flashed in her eyes. "We'll see, girl. Don't be late." This was not the career Leela dreamed of, but it was a step forward, tiny but real. She walked out of the diner, the rain hitting her face, but she smiled for the first time in weeks. She had a job. This was the beginning. Back at the motel, Leela took another step. She found a free mental health hotline online and made an appointment at a local clinic that offered affordable pregnancy counseling. Her mind was a tangle of pain, guilt, and fear, and she knew she couldn't cope without help. A conversation with a psychologist was scheduled for the next week, and Leela felt strangely relieved at the thought that she would be able to talk it out, that someone would help her sort through the chaos of her thoughts. She sat by the window, her fingers touching the cold glass, following the raindrops. The motel was shabby, but at that moment it felt like a refuge, a place where she could catch her breath. Her gaze fell on the suitcase, on the box of things that were all she had left. She thought about Ethan, about his laugh with Sarah, about the way he looked at another woman with a warmth that had once belonged to her. She thought about Damien, about his cruelty, about his lies that had ruined her life. But most of all, she thought about the child, about the tiny life that depended on her. "We can handle this," she whispered, her voice hoarse but full of strength. "I will do everything to make sure you are okay." Her hand lay on her stomach, and she felt a slight warmth, as if the child was answering her. It was her anchor, her reason to get up every morning, despite the pain, despite the refusals, despite the loneliness. Leela knew that the path would be long and difficult. Working as a waitress did not solve all the problems. The salary was modest, and the motel ate up most of her savings. But it was a start, and she clung to it like a life preserver. She recalled her days at Blaze Media, when her ideas shined and she felt like a star. That Leela seemed alien to her now, but there was still a spark in her, not the one that burned from love or ambition, but the one that was born from stubbornness, from the desire to prove that she was stronger than her mistakes. She would start again, even if it meant long shifts at the diner, nights at the motel, and talks with a psychologist to pick up the pieces. The rain outside the window intensified. Its rhythm was like the heartbeat of the city. Leela looked at the drops, and a faint spark of determination appeared in her eyes. She didn't know how she would find housing, how she would raise a child, how she would get her life back, but she knew that she would not give up. Austin was cruel, but she was stronger. She had to be. Leela stood up, her movements slow but sure. She took a notepad out of the box and began writing down a planned small steps that would lead her to stability. Find a part-time job, save money, look for affordable housing, enroll in courses to restore your career. It wasn't a grand plan, but it was hers, and that was enough. She lay down on the bed, her hand still on her stomach. The rain pattered on the window, but now it seemed to her not depressing, but cleansing. Leela closed her eyes. Her breathing became more even. The pain was still there, the pain of Damien's betrayal, of losing Ethan, of his life being ruined. But in this pain she found something new, a strength that grew every day with every step she took for herself and her child. Outside the window, Austin continued to live his life, but Leela was no longer his victim. She was a fighter, and her new start, although humble and shaky, was the beginning of a journey she would take no matter what. The spark in her eyes was weak, but it burned, and Leela knew that this fire would not go out. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.